Canadians are going to the polls on April 25th, and while we've known this election has been coming for 4 years, it feels a bit weird now that it's here.
Okay.
All right, let's do this. For the last year, Canadians have been resigned to accept Pierre Poilievre as the new Prime Minister, with it seemingly like an obvious inevitability, but at the start of the campaign, the Liberals are now leading in the polls and projected to win a majority. The current Prime Minister was in office for 9 days before calling an election, and as of now is the shortest serving Prime Minister in history. And even at a global scale, this is pretty short. It's even less than lettuce Liz Truss from the UK, whose main claim to fame was being the shortest serving PM in UK history. It was so short that a head of lettuce lasted longer than her after she literally overnight crashed the UK bond market with her horrible policies. And this is why it's pretty funny that many of the far-right political commentators online are quoting Liz Truss as evidence as to why Carney is bad for the economy. She likes to trash him a lot, but she's also like the worst. And what's also weird is that I've gone this whole time without even feeling the need to mention Jagmeet Singh, with him now being the longest serving leader of a federal party. Well, that's if you don't count Elizabeth May, who stepped down for an election, then came back. Do you remember Annamie Paul? Yeah, no, neither do I. And yeah, Elizabeth May is back, so cool. She also has a co-runner, but I don't know who that is. Anyway, let's break down the parties, where this election is going, and what might occur. First up, the current government, Mark Carney's Liberals. I don't think the Conservatives took Mark Carney seriously when his name was first floated. His name has been kind of around for about 2 years. As much as I liked him from his books, I didn't think he'd actually pick up popular support.
Who should be the next leader of the federal Liberal Party, and why should it be Doug Ford? I'm not saying he'd be a good prime minister. I'm just saying he'd be better than Pierre, and he kind of aligns with the old school Liberals.
Yeah, not my finest moment. Although I still think Ford will run for and potentially be the next leader of the CPC. And Mark Carney has quickly established himself as a savvy politician, whether it's pocketing a beer at the St. Patrick's Day parade, gently putting down combative media.
With Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to avoid.
What possible conflict would you have, Stephanie? Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
Axing the tax, or skating with the Oilers.
I've followed these guys for almost 60 years. 1971, I was a kid.
Carney has made himself public and known, whether you like him or not. It's very hard for a new politician to establish themselves, especially before their opponents do it first. The Conservatives have been really good at this historically, and they really did try this time. Before Carney was even the winner of the leadership race, they were already putting out tons of ads calling him Carbon Tax Carney and saying that he was just like Justin, and a bunch of other three-word slogans as well. What's funny here is that Pierre Poilievre is accusing Mark Carney of having no substance and being all slogans. And regardless of your political opinion, it should be pretty obvious that Pierre is the master of the slogan, with his slogans in the last year alone including Axe the tax, just like Justin, just inflation, boots not suits, jail not bail, bring it home, stop the crime, build the homes, remove the gatekeepers, spike the hike, I don't even know what that one means, seal the deal, triple, 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 taxes up, costs up, crimes up, time's up, name the names, powerful paychecks, fix the budget, carbon tax Carney, carbon tax Christia, and Canada First. And there's nothing wrong with a good slogan. It's effective political messaging, and it was working for Pierre for over a year. What seems to be impacting his success, though, is Donald Trump. Because Pierre's mannerisms and rhetoric is so similar to Trump's, the anti-Trump sentiment has not only hurt him, but it's really boosted Carney. Mark Carney was the governor of the Bank of Canada, appointed by Stephen Harper, who also later asked him to be his Minister of Finance. Harper loved Carney at the time. He was then the first ever non-British governor of the Bank of England. This was after he left the Harper government on some rocky terms. During the two tenures, he guided Canada through the 2008 financial crisis, as well as Britain through Brexit, which he also said was a bad idea. Regardless of whether or not you attribute successes or failures to him, the messaging that the Liberals have promoted is that Mark Carney knows how to navigate a crisis. And that messaging seems to be resonating among Canadians. I don't want to downplay the political skill of Carney or his experiences, but without Trump's tariffs and attacks on Canada, I don't think his crisis manager experience would be valued in the same way. And that's especially true when Trudeau and the Liberal brand has been so tarnished over the last 2 years. You can call it impeccable timing, and you can attribute it to his experience, or you can just call it luck. But Mark Carney seems to have entered the political scene at the exact perfect time that people wanted his exact style of politician. He's been able to take the Liberal Party from being on the verge of collapse to a majority government. If we look at the polling data and the chances of winning, from the moment Trudeau stepped down to when Trump escalated his tariff threats, and now to the election of Mark Carney as the leader of the Liberals have been rapidly climbing in the polls. And this has come at the expense of the Conservatives, the NDP, and even the Bloc. We have never seen a political shift like this in Canadian history. And listen, if you're someone who isn't a fan of Poilievre and you're excited about Carney, don't forget that politics isn't just about elections. And if you're a leftist, Carney is also taking a centrist or even center-right turn to appeal to a wide spectrum of voters. There are lots of reasons to be critical of Carney, including him not creating a Minister of Labor or for women for the first time in decades. You can also criticize his private sector history and their pursuits of profits over ideals, as well as the cancellation of the capital gains tax for the richest Canadians. Left or right, you can even be critical of the fact that a few of Carney's early moves as Prime Minister and campaign promises are almost word for word, if not the exact same as the promises made by Pierre Poilievre. As I said, politics isn't just elections, and regardless of whether or not the party you voted for wins, you should be advocating for your ideals year-round, every year. And if a party doesn't represent you, push them to do so. But what about Pierre Poilievre? As of just a few months ago, some forecasts projected him to win the largest majority in Canadian history. And as of now, he's expected to grow his party's seat count by a handful, although with every projection that comes out, that shrinks. As of now, it's his goal to separate himself from Trump and to highlight why he's the best pick for Canada. Unfortunately though, due to past advertising by the Conservative Party, Pierre is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. In 2015, the Conservatives marketed Harper as the established and qualified economist versus Justin Trudeau, who was, just the drama teacher with nice hair who wasn't ready. Back then, the argument was that it wasn't logical to vote for the career politician as opposed to the established economist. But now the roles are reversed. Pierre was first elected to Parliament at the age of 24, having earned his pension before he was my age, and his non-political work experience is essentially non-existent.
Recently, the entire country breathed a sigh of relief when the nation was pulled back from the brink of the federal election. But nobody breathed easier than Conservative Member of Parliament Pierre Poilievre, who will now qualify for a full pension the same month he turns 31. Pierre Poilievre, the workers of Canada salute you.
I've been making TikToks for longer than he worked in the private sector. He's been serving for over 20 years, having only ever passed one bill. By visuals alone, regardless of reality, in his 9 days as Prime Minister, Carney has appeared to have accomplished more than Pierre has in 21 years of service. Once again, regardless of the situation, reality, or means, this is the optics that Pierre is facing. This is his uphill battle. And while there is nothing inherently wrong with a career politician, Pierre Poilievre himself wrote an award-winning essay when he was younger, where he stated that politicians should have term limits. Not prime ministers, all MPs, 2 terms. Meanwhile, his opponent is one of the most accomplished bankers and economists in the world. Once again, this isn't to say that everything Carney has done has been good, simply that these are the optics facing the Canadian public. Momentum in Canadian politics is important, and Pierre knows this. It's why he spent the last 2 years non-stop campaigning, and it was working incredibly effectively. Pierre was seen as the obvious answer and solution to the Trudeau problem. But now that Trudeau is gone, he has to market himself and his campaign in an entirely new light, and he seems to be struggling with that. I think the main issue that Pierre is facing is that this is a change election, which sounds weird, but hear me out. While that normally always benefits whatever party is on the other end of the red-blue split from who is in power, Pierre is a victim of his own political success. I am of the opinion that Pierre had already supplanted himself in the minds of Canadians as the future Prime Minister or the Prime Minister in waiting. This kind of removed the idea of choice from the election for many Canadians. Once Trudeau was gone, Carney effectively picked up the winds of change and let it carry him, leaving Pierre Poilievre behind. Pierre, who is the actual change candidate in this election, is being subconsciously seen by Canadian voters as the establishment. And I legitimately think this is because of how effective and successful the Conservative marketing was in the pre-Trump, pre-2025 political landscape. And because of this, Pierre is not just fighting for victory as the Prime Minister, but also his job as the leader of the Conservatives. While he is still performing better in the polls than both Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole did and will probably get more seats than them, he also oversaw the largest drop in the polls in Conservative history. The Conservative alliance has been held together with duct tape since Harper left in 2015. The Progressive Conservatives have essentially ceded control of the party to Pierre and his faction. Essentially at the federal level, Progressive Conservatives don't exist, and they have no power in the party. This is why Carney has been so effective and been able to run himself as a progressive conservative. Yes, I meant to say progressive twice. Jason Kenney is already gearing up to run for leader of the Conservatives. And there's also a lot of mumblings about maybe Doug Ford doing it as well. And I know what you're going to say. Doug doesn't know French. But I dare you to name one time that Doug Ford not knowing something has stopped him from being an opportunist or running for political office. He has failed upwards his entire life, and he's not going to stop here. Doug Ford isn't even endorsing Pierre in this election. And while there are a lot of conflicting reports as to whether or not Pierre asked Doug for help, Doug has made it very clear. His MPPs are too busy with Ontario to campaign for a federal election. And there are a lot of voters in the seat-rich 905 who voted both for Trudeau and for Ford, and Doug wants to stay on their good side as the political winds in the 905 have shifted towards Carney. The expectations for each party leader going into the election have been different. Carney was originally just expected to avoid a collapse to third or fourth place status. Pierre, on the other hand, was expected to win a majority. Meanwhile, the Bloc and the NDP were just expected to maintain or grow. And May was expected to essentially show up. I don't want to downplay the Greens. I like them, but you know. And there were no expectations for the PPC. Most people kind of forget they exist, especially as Pierre has made them entirely irrelevant in the modern political landscape. The party and leader, though, who seem the least likely to achieve their goals is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. The NDP are currently on track to lose official party status, falling to below 10 seats, and there are many factors that are causing this. Strategic voting is pushing many center and left of center voters to consider Mark Carney. The NDP has also in some ways been leaning more to the center themselves, eroding their unique status in the Canadian political landscape. There is also the issue of Jagmeet Singh's association with Trudeau and his flip-flopping. Because Singh propped up the unpopular Trudeau Liberals, they also wear some of that damage. And honestly, it's kind of incredible seeing as the Carney Liberals no longer seem to be carrying that weight. Singh also reneged on some of the promises and threats that he made as he tried to posture while his party was in no position to call for an election. And people saw through that. Lastly, there was the issue of the foreign interference report, which left a bad taste in the mouths of many Canadians. Before it was released, Singh and Trudeau had insinuated that there were traitors in Canada's parliament. Meanwhile, Pierre didn't comment on it directly because he was the only political leader in the country who refused to get his security clearance. Singh spoke many times of the concerns in the report, but meanwhile, Elizabeth May had a more honest approach, stating that while there were concerns, there were no traitors. In my criticism of the NDP online, the director of digital outreach for the NDP emailed me with concerns. While I appreciate and understand where they were coming from and where they were trying to correct me, I think that sharing with you what I wrote in response to them is a great way to understand my opinions on the NDP as they are now. And for reference, when I sent this email on January 29th of this year, the NDP were polling between 16 and 19%. Now they're between 9 and 13%. That's a little bit of foreshadowing that maybe I was right. I understand where you're coming from, but my point about the third party still stands. There is less goodwill given to parties outside of the established duopoly, and the comments made lent themselves to the suggestion that there were traitors or otherwise reasons to suspect severe tampering. This wasn't acted upon by the NDP. Mark Carney is about to eat your lunch on high-information leftist voters who are turning away from the NDP as they don't see a direct opportunity with the party to increase the material conditions of their lives. I'm using the language of the NDP to talk to the NDP. The party has strayed too far from its worker roots, and that is eroding credibility. The issue with aligning your comments with Trudeau right now is that he's on his way out, and even his own party is distancing themselves from him. Comparing comments to Justin's does not lend credibility. It removes credibility. The NDP has also painted itself into a corner with the election calls. Most NDP supporters don't support an early election, and Jagmeet has consistently put himself at odds with his own public declarations. This is not an indictment on his character, simply an acknowledgement that in this game of political poker, his bluffs are increasingly obvious. The NDP needs to inspire. To do that, they need to identify themselves as different from what the Liberals are offering. Beyond that, in places like Ontario, the Ontario NDP is having a similar identity crisis when it comes to sticking to their worker and identity roots. The Sarah Jama situation is flipping NDP voters red out of spite, especially as the party veers to a more centrist ideology. We have a political spectrum for a reason, and the NDP operate best when that place on the spectrum is clearly defined and consistently advocated for. The NDP did not reply to my email. Meanwhile, when it comes to the Bloc, they're in a bit of a different scenario. They aren't down in the polls for any reason other than a huge resurgence in Canadian identity and pride due to the trade war. And many Bloc voters refuse to vote for the Conservatives. For example, After the 2008 election, with the minority victory for Harper, his government was propped up and supported by the Bloc. This infuriated Bloc voters to the point where the Bloc dropped to 4 seats in the next election, and the NDP had a huge wave and overtook Quebec, with multiple NDP candidates being caught off guard with their victory. Some of them were students and had to drop out of university to become MPs. One of them was even on vacation at the time, not even considering the possibility that they could win. This means that in the scenario where the Conservatives win a minority government, they would really struggle to even pass a budget or a throne speech, because no parties are actively willing to work with them in modern Canadian politics. They've made themselves toxic. The Bloc is fine working with other political parties in order to gain concessions from the government of the day, but they would be wary of working with Pierre, who many in Quebec see as Harper 2.0, or worse. Honestly, I talk about the Greens, but they're going to get 1 to 2 seats, and they won't make waves. Some projections even have May as not winning her seat. So where does this leave us? As of now, we only have a handful of promises to go off of. And as it stands, on paper, Carney and Pierre's policies don't ultimately seem that different when you look at what has been concretely promised. And really, outside of Pierre's dollar-for-dollar budget rule, which would require the government to cut $1 of spending for every new dollar added, which would be catastrophic for the country, we don't really have much to go off of. Although, by the time this video comes out, that may change. His dollar-for-dollar cut is essentially Timu Canadian Doge. This election will not ultimately end up being about specific policies and promises, but about direction. Who do you trust to lead the country on economics and in our ongoing disputes with Trump and the US? Who is better suited to increase our global allies and strengthen our ties with the EU? Who do you think is best positioned to help Canada succeed for the next 4 years and beyond? If you like that video, please like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon. I would appreciate it if you join the Patreon. It helps me pay for my editor. I also have a podcast called Perfectly Frank. You can find it on all the different podcasting apps, as well as on YouTube in video form. I recently interviewed Professor Neil, who is a TikToker and other online creator. He's also big on Instagram. And my upcoming interviews also include a warrior philosopher, as well as Unlearn 16. And I have a few other ones that I'm waiting on, and they should be fun. If you like this video, once again, please like and subscribe and do all the things and leave some comments and stuff. Let's have a conversation. I am very sick right now. I am hopped up on Advil and Tylenol and antibiotics, and I am drinking my tea to make my throat feel better. I lost my voice today, and I needed to get this video out because it's already been delayed. So I'm sorry if I sounded raspy or if you did not like the way that I sounded today, but I need to stop talking.
Okay.